Welcome to NTD News. I'm Stephanie Cox. Here are today's top stories. Trump's legal defense team lays out their argument ahead of the former president's impeachment trial tomorrow. What will become of the Republican Party in the post-Trump era? A survey of Trump voters suggests the GOP can't risk losing the diverse coalition Trump built over the past 4 years. Journalist and author Andy No gives an update on Antifa. He says the radical group is still active. A Texas Republican congressman died on Sunday. Cause of death is undisclosed, but he battled with cancer and tested positive for the virus last month. A 20-year-old in China is now facing 14 years in jail. That's for being involved in posting information about the regime's leader's family.
There's a bird.
Former President Trump's impeachment trial starts tomorrow. His defense team is urging the Senate to dismiss the case, calling it a brazen political act. But even if the Senate does vote on whether to dismiss the case, it's unlikely that would meet with success, with the Senate tied at 50-50. NTD's Melina Weisskopf explains what we can expect this week as the trial unfolds.
Just 1 day before the trial is set to start, Trump's lawyers sent a brief detailing their own argument against the impeachment trial. Trump's defense team and even a majority of the Senate Republicans agree that it holds no constitutional basis. Now, Trump's lawyers are calling the trial a political act, saying their argument is a false narrative propped up by biased and mischaracterized media reports.
And I do agree with Trump's defense here. All they're doing is pulling from leftist media, then they use that as fact. We're living in an era, and I think this is a very dangerous thing and an important point, where an accusation is treated as fact.
For example, the Democrats argue that Trump's words urging protesters to fight much harder and to show strength incited violence. Now, what's missing here and what Trump's defense team plans to argue is that Trump also told the group he expects they'll march to the Capitol building peacefully. Meckler's practiced law for 2 decades and says there is no basis for the argument that Trump's words incited violence. That's because the legal standard for incitement requires an immediate connection between Trump's words and the violence.
We have very expansive free speech rights protected by the First Amendment. By the way, not granted by the First Amendment. I think this is really important to note. We were endowed by our Creator with the right to speak freely, to have freedom of conscience, freedom of religion. Not something that government grants. It's something that government should not intrude upon. And so we should be careful of any government intrusion.
And Trump's defense team, arguing along the same lines, accuses the Democratic Party of seeking to, quote, carve out a mechanism by which they can silence a political opponent in a minority party.
Well, if the president's language is incitement, then I have to say that almost every single major elected Democrat in the United States Congress, at least anyone that was doing any media during the Black Lives Matter riots, they were actually much closer to inciting violence. They were telling us that when cities were burning, we needed to understand why people were doing this. We actually had Democratic people in cities, at one point the mayor of Baltimore saying we need to make room for people who wanted to destroy things. So
another argument Trump's defense makes is that the FBI confirmed the violence was planned several days in advance. So these are some of the topics we expect to be brought up throughout this trial. They'll start tomorrow with around 4 hours of debate, and then the Senate will vote over its constitutionality. Opening arguments are set to start Wednesday at noon, and House impeachment managers and Trump's legal team will get 16 hours to present their cases. So that's what we expect to see in the following days as we follow this trial. Back to you, Steph.
Thanks, Melina. And what does the Trump brand mean for the Republican Party in the post-Trump era? A new survey of voters offers some ideas.
A January YouGov survey shows support for Trump among Republican voters is still very strong, but there are also some ideological divides.
2/3 of the people who voted for Trump said they're more of a supporter of Trump than the party, but that means 34% said they weren't. And as you can see, the number of people, or the share of people who say they are more a supporter of Donald Trump than the Republican Party rises with self-perceived ideological conservatism.
Trump voters can self-identify as either very conservative, or moderate/liberal. Supervisor of the survey, Henry Olson, says those who say they are conservative are the biggest bloc among Trump voters. The very conservative voters are only 29% of those surveyed. Notably, 23% of those surveyed switched from Obama in 2012 to Trump in 2020. They identify with Trump's position on trade more so than consistent Republican voters.
There's a substantial block of people within the Trump coalition who would generally agree with Donald Trump's non-traditional positions on trade. 40% say that trade hurts America's economy rather than helps it, and that number rises for people who switched parties.
Olson says this is because Trump's approach to trade is a break from the traditional Republican Party approach. He adds that Trump voters are more united by the idea that trade reduces jobs for Americans.
Majorities of all social classes among Trump voters believe that trade reduces jobs for Americans. That's the poor, the working class, the middle class, and the self-described upper middle class. Regardless of what they think about trade, they all think it reduces jobs, and that's an overriding voter sentiment that Republican leaders cannot safely ignore.
When it comes to social issues such as abortion and same-sex marriage, Trump voters are divided along ideological lines. On the other hand, issues that unite Trump voters the most are patriotism and the idea of American greatness.
Christianity is under attack in America today. 89% of Trump voters agree. America is the greatest country in the world, as opposed to simply one great country among many. In Pew polls, Democrats are much likelier to take the second position of one among many, but 89% of Trump voters say it's the greatest. The fear that America is being lost is also a uniting issue. Americans are losing faith in the idea that make our country great. 90%. And note that there's no difference between party switchers and party loyalists on this.
Olson says that moving forward, the Republican Party can unite Trump voters by focusing on general feelings about the country rather than on specific policies on economics. The survey also shows that a significant portion of Trump voters show discontent for the Republican Party.
A former Trump aide says the past president is happier now that he doesn't use Twitter or social media. Trump's senior advisor spoke to the UK's Sunday Times. Since he was banned from many social media platforms, Trump has made few public statements, but he is reportedly considering creating his own social media platform, and it's expected he will re-emerge on social media at some point. For now, former aide Jason Miller says not being subject to the harmful echo chamber has been a good thing for Trump and for former First Lady Melania. Miller also says after leaving office, it looks like Trump has been able to relax for the first time in years. A reporter asks the White House if the president's son still has a stake in a Chinese firm. Here's how the press secretary responds. NTD's Juliette Song has those details.
President Biden's son may still be doing business in China. In a press briefing last Friday,
Songs kind
a
of like
reporter
sing,
asked the White House.
like me.
Just recently, there were reports that the president's son still owns a 10% stake in a Chinese investment firm formed with state-owned entities. Do you have an update on the divestment from that investment?
He has been working to unwind his investment, but I would certainly point you as a private citizen. I would point you to him or his lawyers on the outside. Biden has repeatedly said that his family would stay away from foreign business to avoid conflicts of interest. He said last year that if he became president, no one in his family would, quote, have any business relationship with anyone that relates to a foreign corporation or a foreign country, period, end of story. Biden also said last December that neither his son nor his family would be involved in any business or enterprise that's in conflict or appears to be in conflict. Reports emerged in 2019 that Joe Biden's son Hunter was on the board of a Chinese investment firm. The firm is called BHR Partners, and one of its owners is a large state-owned bank in China. Hunter Biden said he would resign from the company by 2019, and Chinese business records show he left the position last April, but he continues to have a 10% stake there through his company Scanny Atlas LLC. It remains unclear if Hunter Biden is in the process of divesting his stake there. NTD reached out for comment but didn't get a response before airtime. Reporting by Juliette Song, NTD News.
The Secretary of State stresses he'll stand up for human rights and democratic values in his first call with a top Chinese official. NTD's Miguel Moreno has more on that call and President Biden's direction on China.
Secretary of State Anthony Blinken set the tone in his first call with Chinese official Yang Jiechi. According to the State Department, Blinken told the official that they will defend the U.S.'s national interests, stand up against China's human rights violations, and hold the regime accountable for abuses of what he called the international system. But Jiechi warned President Biden's administration to not cross the red line days ago. But some of Biden's cabinet members and nominees appear more relaxed about the regime's socialist, subversive, industry-conquering agenda, all laid out in a 2020 Pentagon report. Take Governor Gina Raimondo, nominee for head of Department of Commerce. She's refused committing to keep Huawei on the blacklist, a list that penalizes the Chinese company, banning it from buying any U.S. technology without the federal government's permission.
Well, let me ask about Huawei in particular. Can you commit that Huawei will remain on the list?
I will commit that once, should I be confirmed and I am there, I will review the policy, consult with you, consult with industry, consult with our allies, and make an assessment as to what's best for American national and economic security.
Huawei, a company tied to the Chinese regime, is blacklisted for posing a risk to national security. Reports accuse the Chinese Communist Party of using Huawei's telecommunications technology in its monitoring of Chinese citizens and persecution of Uyghurs in Xinjiang, a region turned police state. Then there's the head of Biden's Asia policy team, Kurt Campbell. He was the vice chairman of the U.S.-China Strong Foundation until at least August 2020. This foundation celebrated the